Hey, it's E.B. Moss, and this is Season 2, Episode 19 of Insider Interviews, and it's with Angie Hicks, the co-founder of Angi, formerly known as Angie's List. And if you haven't heard of that, then you may be living under a sheet rock. It's an online directory that connects consumers with local home service providers, from contractors to home cleaners. And Angie started Angie's List in 1995. And in the nearly 30 years of its existence, it's gone from being in a few cities to being a national directory for those pros to being international. Went through an IPO, an acquisition, and a rebrand, and now it gets millions of monthly visits and supports hundreds of thousands of skilled pros. Here's how she did it. Here's Angie Hicks. Hi, Angie.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Better for seeing you and speaking with you.
It's great to be here.
Speaking of speaking, I want to talk about construction. Not a house, though. You probably talk about that enough. I want to talk about constructing a business. You've done it all, from literally the studs on up. And since Insider Interviews is all about media, marketing, and advertising, we're going to talk about how you help put Angie on the map with some smart marketing moves. For everybody's benefit, as if they didn't know, I'm speaking with Angie Hicks, the co-founder of what historically was called Angie's List, but now it's just Angie, like just Jack from Will and Grace. And this is the Angie. It's so exciting.
Thanks.
I know that you have spoken about this many times, including with our friend Guy Raz on his show, but you have such a great origin story. So I'm just going to ask you to talk about how this whole thing got started.
So I started Angi, which was Angie's List at the time, about 30 years ago, right when I graduated from college. My co-founder was struggling to have some home improvements done on a 1920s house in Columbus, Ohio. And he was familiar with a little service called Unified Neighbors that he had used in Indianapolis to redo houses, but started looking around and realized there was nothing like that. There was nowhere to turn to kind of get the real scoop on local home pros. And so he convinced me when I graduated from college to move to Ohio to help start it. And with Unified Neighbors, we had kind of a pretty good blueprint. We knew what the business would look like. We knew, how it would work. Back then it was pre-internet days. It was a call-in service, a magazine. Pros ran ads in our newsletter in the magazine. But they hadn't executed the marketing plan at Unified Neighbors since the early 70s. And their marketing plan was going door to door.
Oh.
And selling memberships to Unified Neighbors to homeowners.
Okay.
Fast forward to 1995, we're without a marketing plan. So we're like, well, I guess Angie will go door to door. So we're like, we'll try that.
Okay.
It was a bad idea right from the start. I mean, I am an introvert. My sales skills are horrible. I would go out and I would measure my sales in 1 or 2 sales a day. So I was like, if I made 2 sales, I was like, that was the best day ever.
Woohoo. Okay.
And we quickly realized that marketing plan probably wasn't going to work for us. And we needed to quickly start to think of other things. And, quite honestly, marketing was the largest expense in the business. It was, as we were kind of modeling out what we needed to do, acquiring those homeowners was the biggest expense. We were a local marketer, stamping things out city by city. And so first we started going to trade shows. So we started doing home shows and we would sell memberships at our booth. That worked well. And then in Columbus, they had a really good network of local newspapers and neighborhood newspapers. So we started advertising there, and we had a little 2x3 ad that was basically made of clip art that said, it was made of clip art. I made it. Again, also not a designer. It said, tired of lousy service. So was I. So I got together my neighbors to find out who were the best contractors in the area. I remember the copy, which is kind of crazy this many years later. That's how long we used it, actually.
And do you remember, you had to cut out that little clip art with an X-Acto knife and kind of press it on the paper?
It was fascinating. But you know what? It worked. Everybody said that little ad wasn't going to work, but you know what? It worked. And the phone started ringing and we started selling memberships. And within the year, we had 1,000 homeowners had joined in Columbus.
Holy moly. So you were a marketing genius from the beginning.
Maybe I was a fearless marketer, that I was willing to try anything might be the better answer.
Yeah. Well, I have heard you talk about the fact that you kind of had to get over your sales flop sweats and you treated it like a numbers game, right? Because was your background in nothing that I can do, like economics or accounting or something like that?
I studied economics, I had a minor in math. At one point I wanted to be an actuary.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So I speak in numbers more often than words. So that's exactly how I do things. I'm kind of like, hey, if you've got your pitch and the pitch is fine, you need to execute it so many times. If your conversion rate is this, you will get this outcome. That was my view.
Oh, I failed math 3 times, Angie. I would have been a psychologist. True, but I couldn't take statistics.
It was the only way that I could mentally get around the idea that I had to go out and sell.
Okay, whatever tricks work for you. I mean,
Yeah.
And look at the success now. So speaking of numbers, it's a ginormous company now, and Angie is international. Yeah?
That's right.
Well, okay. So let's go back to kind of how you put that on the international map, if you will. What were some of the other marketing journey tools or mile markers that you took?
So then, once we figured out the little neighborhood newspaper would work, we started, spending the big bucks by taking that 2x3 ad and putting it in the daily newspaper. So we put that in the Columbus Dispatch. And then the other marketing tool that worked really well for us early in the days was NPR, National Public Radio. And, it was great. It was inexpensive. We could get our message out. And quite honestly, their listeners matched well to ours, to what we were looking for. I mean, it was people that valued information and wanted to make good decisions about their home. So it was a good source for us. So that was our tools for quite some time. In fact, we ran that same 2x3 clip art ad in the New York Times.
Well, I, of course, love all things audio, and Gina Garubo has been on the show, the head of sales at National Public Media, and Guy Raz was my first interview. I know that you were on his show as well, How I Built This. So I love NPR, but I've also worked in broadcast radio and, of course, podcasting.
Yeah.
So I know that what's interesting about audio is that when a DJ or a host reads an ad, that a lot of times it's recalled as word of mouth, right? So
right. They feel like they know the person.
That's right. Yeah. Right. Where did I hear that again? Did my friend tell me?
Right.
So, yeah. So I love that you started with NPR, and now, well, you're doing podcasting.
Exactly.
So I want to talk about that, but I also want to do full disclosure, which is that I'm just thrilled that Moss Appeal, my company, was able to help you produce your first ever podcast with Crackerjack editing team from Steve Lack Audio. But I want to understand the genesis of how you decided to produce Trade Up with Angie, your brand new podcast. How did that come about?
Well, it actually came out of a conversation I was having with our team. So one of the things that is really important to me and always has been, and probably because I was so personally connected to the business and I'm an introvert, and I'm always thinking of ways to stay connected with the team, with our customers. And because I believe that, your customers relate best to people more than they do just to brands. And, so over the years, I've always tried to think of ways that I could kind of keep myself kind of in touch. And so, a few years ago, I came up with an idea that I was going to hold office hours, for example, with our pros. And any pro in the network could sign up. It was a 20-minute call. It's actually a Zoom video, so we get the chance to talk face to face. And they can talk about whatever they want. And it's an amazing kind of cultural shift because, that accessibility creates opportunity for pros to kind of ask anything and, feel heard and for me to get to know them and to have a great conversation. I mean, I get probably more out of those conversations than they do. But it creates a connection. I mean, at Angie, we're about building lifelong relationships, and we, whether it's a homeowner that we're helping them kind of through their entire home ownership cycle, which might cover 2 or 3 houses in their lifetime, to a pro who, starts out as an apprentice plumber, eventually owns their plumbing business, grows it to a couple of cities, and retires. I mean, we want to be there every step of the way. And I think that connection is really important. So once I started having these conversations, one of the things that came out of it, I was talking to our marketing team, and I was like, these conversations are great. I would love to be able to share these with the team and share them with others, because I think there is a real opportunity to share kind of, why people start these businesses, what it's like to really be in these businesses. I think it was an unserved niche that we're not talking enough about the trades, and we're not talking about enough about that opportunity. I mean, we talk a lot about tech people being entrepreneurs, but we don't talk enough about, the local plumber being an entrepreneur, which they absolutely are. So the marketing team got to work and, like, hey, Angie, why don't we do this podcast? Let's give this a try. And, I'm always game for a new idea. So we kicked it off.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm going to come back to the podcast too, but just to, give you some props. Your title went from co-founder, you've been CMO, and now you're Chief Customer Officer, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So it's all about having conversations.
It is my favorite. I mean, quite honestly, it's my favorite part. I love marketing, but I also just love, kind of seeing how our product impacts the customer and how we can continually tweak and improve to make sure it's meeting current needs.
And the conversations are terrific that you've been having. And I know, for example, we've produced a few of them so far, more to come. But in episode 2, apropos what you were talking about with someone named Vinny Kersey, you were talking about how the trades are also kind of technical. So they're smart homes now. And you said that the furnaces today are not the furnaces of 40 years ago. So people in the skilled trades really need to stay current. So I think your show is pointing that out as well too, right?
Right. Which it does. And I think it also, there's not enough young people going into the trades. And I think kind of shining a light on that technical side of the trades, I think is going to make it more attractive. It's like, you don't think about that. It's like, I'm working on a computer basically when I'm working on your furnace because it runs on a motherboard that does everything versus being a true mechanical furnace of, 30 years ago.
Yeah. So actually the company overall kind of created this whole initiative called Trade Up. And I know you have that section on your website, and I'll, of course, add that to the show notes, but it's Angie.com/trade-up. But you had started some of these informative tips about how to get into the skilled trades, and that's where the podcast will live also. But you guys have also traded up yourselves. You went through a rebranding a few years back. You took off the E in Angie and the list and made it just Angie. How did you market that? How did that rebrand come about?
Well, it was really, an opportunity to give the brand a fresh look. I mean, the brand, at that point had been around for, around 25 years. And we wanted to make sure that the brand was resonating and was relevant and actually spoke to everything that we do as a business. And while there is absolutely still a list, it isn't everything as the business is today. They can do so much more at Angie than just, look at a list of contractors. You can schedule, you can book, you can buy services directly on the Angie app. So we wanted to make sure that the brand would flex and be able to kind of be a bigger umbrella across everything we do, while at the same time, carrying the heritage of the Angie's List brand.
And the overall company is owned by IAC, I believe, right?
That's right.
Okay. And speaking of brands also, I think that you've kind of turned some of your pros into rock stars, or they're rock stars and they found
They're
you.
rock stars in their own right. We're just finding them. How's that?
Okay. We're going to talk to a pro named Matt DeBarra. He's done like zillions of interviews and stuff, fourth generation contractor, and he's got like this great TV queue on top of it. And then interesting people also. In episode 1, we talked to Kathy Cuppy, and she was one of the first females in the trades. And she talked about how she started out also wanting to be a psychologist. If you hadn't found your way into this crazy business, you would have been an actuary. Was there anything else?
Well, actually, door number 1 was for me to go to be a business consultant. I had an offer to be a business consultant. And then door number 2 was like, crazy idea, but, why don't you give me a year and come start this business with me?
Because you had interned with Bill Osterley, right?
That's right.
Oh, and he just put faith in you, had conversations, nurtured you, and said, try it, right?
Yep. He was my best coach and biggest fan in kind of getting the business off the ground. And about 3 years later, he joined the business full time as well.
Amazing. And then you took some time off. I mean, you were already in, I don't know how many markets, and the business was on its way. And then you went back to school, Harvard, for your MBA. Was that hard to step away? Did you have to change roles when you came back? Did you go full time and take a full break, or?
Going to Harvard was a very important step for me, not in this path of like, okay, going to Harvard was a very important path. It was actually, had I not gone to business school, I probably wouldn't have stuck with the business. It is hard to start a business, especially when you're 22 and you don't know anything. I mean, every day was new. It was just hard. And, starting a business is lonely. Mm-hmm. I was living in a city that, I just didn't know anybody. I grew up in Indiana and I moved to Ohio to start the business. So I was pretty burnt out. So business school was an opportunity for me to step away, kind of gain perspective, kind of absorb and understand so much that I'd learned and kind of put it in perspective. So I look at that as a really important kind of part of the journey that I went through, to come back. And then, in fact, when I was finishing up at Harvard, I actually was interviewing elsewhere because I'd never really interviewed much before. So I remember sitting in an interview, and it was going to be marketing in a consumer packaging company. And the person who was interviewing me would ask me a question. I would give the answer, and he would look at me and say, "Thank you." He'd ask the next question. I'd give him an answer. He'd look at me and say, "Thank you." It made me realize how important the people you work with are to your success. Yeah. And, in that scenario, I was like, this person's going to be my boss. And if this is the dynamic and this is the interaction, then, I'm probably not going to get the most out of this role. And so, so that's what compelled me back to Angie's List. It was, it's like, I know the people, I'm going to learn a ton from the people. We got a lot of interesting things to do. So I'm going back. But I think it's always important to kind of sometimes go and look what the other path could be.
Yeah.
Because it helps to reinforce the path you've chosen.
Well, that's a great point. Validates your decisions. And by the way, I would not have put that person on the podcast. Thank you.
Well, I thank that person, right? Like, had it not been for that person, I might not have come back.
Yeah, that's... So if you were going to join the skilled trades today, would you be... Well, I happen to know that you're working with wood now in a way. But would you be a carpenter?
I don't know. I might do landscaping or something like that. I might kind of go in that realm. I've got an orchard I'm trying to grow right now. We will see.
Apple trees?
Some apple trees and some peach trees.
Oh my.
Yeah. One of these years, I tell my kids, like, when I'm 80, that you will have a beautiful orchard and you'll have more apples than you know what to do with. Yeah. Until then, just humor me. I don't know. Maybe painting. I like, kind of the precision of painting. Maybe that. I don't know. But I'll be honest, I am a person that I will never claim to be a DIYer. My husband and I, when we were first married, lived in a little 500 square foot house and took carpet up in one of the bedrooms and decided to refinish the pretty hardwood floor underneath and restain it. But I knew I could not rent the big sander because I would, either kill myself, hurt him, destroy the walls. I don't know. So I used a tiny little hand sander on my hand and knees and sanded the entire floor. Probably took years off my life by doing that, but oh well.
But Angie, at that point, Angie's List already existed, so you knew people who knew people.
I did, and I did. I hired a lot of the things done there. I don't know what compelled us for that particular project that we wanted to do that one. I don't know. I mean, it probably taught us that we didn't want to do others. I'm like, isn't it? Back in the day, it was like you should never wallpaper with your spouse because it'll kind of cause such an argument.
Is that a saying?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
For sure. Don't wallpaper with your spouse.
Oh, okay.
It's really hard.
So you talked a bit, just to wrap it up, about being in local communities and the importance of developing relationships. And that to me is so purpose-driven. It's really important that we find our roots in local communities anymore. So I'm wondering if Angi itself, or this Angi, has some thoughts about brand purpose or your personal approach to purpose.
Right. Well, I mean, when we think about what we do, I mean, we view ourselves as, the home of the skilled trades. It's really to celebrate all of those jobs done well and, really shine a light. And become a real partner for homeowners to be sure that those projects that they're thinking about, they might be uneasy about, didn't want to do in the first place. Like when one of my kids backed her car into the garage door, there's always something in home ownership. Yeah. And you need somebody to kind of take that stress away. That's what Angi wants to be. And that's why we spend a lot of time talking about, kind of attracting more people to the trades, because it's an incredible career opportunity. And, they pay well. The people in the trades, they really like what they do. And I think that is really important. And I think it's something that we should be talking about more. I mean, especially like with Gen Zers, I think about, it's really important for them that they, kind of find real value in what they're doing. And I think that satisfaction in their career is going to be really important. And kind of bring new light to it. And I think the trades can be a great option. And I do not think AI is going to take over the trades. I do not think AI is going to start swinging a hammer for us.
No, not anytime soon. Hopefully, ChatGPT won't be able to interview people either, because I just enjoy that too much. So
exactly.
Anyway, on that note, Angie Hicks, thank you so much for joining me on Insider Interviews, and thanks for letting us support you with Trade Up with Angie, your new podcast, and thanks for encouraging a whole new stream of people finding a great career path. You're the best.
Thank you. It was great being here.
Well, I hope you got some good insider scoop from this episode of Insider Interviews with me, E.B. Moss. If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/mossappeal. And I hope you'll follow Insider Interviews on social media and let me know if you have a question or a suggestion for a next stellar guest in media marketing and advertising. Speaking of stellar, my theme music was composed and performed by the incomparable Grammy-winning John Clayton. If I can help you with your company's podcast, please find me at mossappeal.com. Thanks again for listening.